We are halfway through January. I know it is hard to believe. When 2024 slipped into the rear view mirror, I had delusions that when the page of the calendar was turned, that things might start to get a little better in the world, at least for a few weeks. Seems 2025 has started out trying to make 2024 seem tame. The world continues to solve its problems with violence. Ukraine, the Holy Land, Sudan, just to name a few. Being a few thousand miles away from all that is happening can allow us to mentally distance ourselves from the pain and the suffering of that wars. When we hear the disclaimer from the newscaster, the images that you are about to view are graphic in nature. We can actively choose to turn the channel, especially when the images are the aftermath of a bombing of a hospital. This disclaimer doesn't change their nature. They are images of children maimed and dead, lying in craters. Graphic is an understatement. As we live in Iowa, we can actively choose to distance ourselves from the pain and suffering of the people in California whose homes are now in ashes. We distance ourselves by pointing fingers and placing blame. We distance ourselves by saying things like, well, it's just possessions. They can be replaced. But can that photo of mom really be replaced? Can that lock of hair from the loved one really be replaced? Sometimes we don't get the luxury of distancing ourselves from the pain of the world. There are times when we get up in the middle of the night and the pain in our body is too much, and so it's a trip down to the ER. Or it's the cancer. Or it's any other bad news that the doctor wants to tell us. And they're all things that we don't want to face, but those things we don't have a choice. As those things and the many other headlines collide with my prayer life, a question for me keeps popping up. I keep asking, why? Why, God? Why is this happening? Where are you in all of this? But then my prayers move from pondering towards asking God. Well, asking isn't quite the right word. Pleading with God. Do something about it. And I might be alone in that, but maybe I'm not. Maybe you pray the same thing. Maybe you wonder why. God, oh, why? Perhaps you plead as well. God, do something. Today's gospel lesson is found only in the Gospel of John. Here is a story of Jesus taking water, lots of water, and performing a miracle, or as John calls them, signs. And it's a sign that only a few people know about. The only ones that seem to know that something happened are the servants, the disciples, and Jesus' mother. The story is familiar to us, especially if you've grown up in the church. It might almost be too familiar. As the story is told, they ran out of wine. There's nothing as embarrassing for a host than not having enough food and drink for our guests. With wine as a symbol of celebration for all the obvious reasons, it was grievous that the wine tank moved closer and closer, and then just beyond the letter E for empty, just like my gas tank in my car all too often happens to be. And at this point, Jesus' mother steps in. If we only had the Gospel of John, Jesus' mother's name would be lost to the sands of time. John never mentions her name, but thanks to the other gospel writers, we know her name, Mary. And she bookends Jesus' ministry here on earth. Here at the start, we see her here at the wedding of Cana. And then at the other time, once again, she stands at the foot of the cross as she looks up and watches her son be executed. Jesus' mother knows that the wine has given out. She informed Jesus about the situation. They have no wine. They have no wine, son. Do something about it. Jesus' response was like a brushback pitch in baseball. I suppose the late Bob Uecker would have called the pitch just a bit inside. And Jesus responds to his mother, "Woman, what concern is that to me and to you?" I'm sure his mother muttered, "Well, son, it may not matter to you, but it matters to me." And Jesus isn't done. He added some clarification. "My hour has not yet come." For us in our time, we have the benefit of seeing the whole story of the Gospel of John. We stand outside that story, and we know his hour is coming. We know that his hour will come soon enough, and it will be crucifixion that leads to resurrection and ascension. And whatever transpired between Jesus and his mother, maybe she gave him the look that all mothers have to let their child know that something is expected of them. Yeah, that look. And after that look, she turns it over to Jesus by saying to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." John describes the setting. There's these 6 huge, cavernous water jars. They're standing there. And they were used for the Jewish rites of purification, and the servants ensured that those water jars brimmed with water. And Jesus instructs the servants to draw some out and take it to the person in charge of the banquet. What Jesus was up to now becomes clear. The one in charge tasted the water become wine and went to the bridegroom, saying to them, "People don't save Bordeaux right bank Merlots until the end of the party. Instead, the custom is to serve the best wine first, and then the numb drinkers will finish off with the cheap boxed wine." And that ends the wedding. But it doesn't end the pondering. When we hear this story, we focus on the abundance of the wine, rightfully so. Jesus took water meant for ritual purification and made about 1,000 bottles of wine for the party. Not just cheap wine, but good wine, maybe the best wine. And Jesus keeps the party going. But here's my ponderings. What if Jesus' mother didn't come to him, didn't prod him? What happens if Mary never utters the words, "They have no wine," along with Mary's unspoken words, "and do something about it"? And he did. Mary tugs on Jesus' sleeve, prodding him to act, and then she trusts that he will. And she trusts that he will act, and Mary looked at the servants and told them to do whatever he tells you to do. And I like to believe that Mary, even in this moment, doesn't know what her son is about to do. They have no wine. Do something about it. And he does. And while this might be the first time in John's gospel that someone prods Jesus to do something, it certainly isn't the last time. And later in John's gospel, a message gets sent to Jesus. The message is from his friends Mary and Martha. Mary was the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with her hair. The message read, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." It reads, "Come quickly, Jesus. Our brother, your friend Lazarus, is sick, and things do not look good." And Jesus tells his disciples in that moment that Lazarus' illness will not lead to death. With those remarks, Jesus stays where he's at for 2 more days. 2 more days. And then after that, and then a few days of travel, Jesus and his disciples are approaching Bethany, close to the home of Mary and Martha. And John informs them that Lazarus has now been in the grave for 4 days. When Martha hears that Jesus is coming, she runs out and meets him on the road. Martha comes close to Jesus and says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, Lazarus would not have died." She says, "Lord, if only you had come when we told you he was sick, you could have arrived before he died. Jesus, you could have done something about it, and you didn't. You took so long, and all there is to do now is visit a tomb. We asked you, Jesus. We asked you to do something, and what did you do? You waited. And now what?" And then Mary hears that Martha has gone out to meet Jesus, and she too gets up and runs to him. With tears streaming down her face, she echoes Martha, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus, if you would have come, you could have done something, but you didn't. Now what, Jesus? We asked you to do something, and what did you do? What will you do now, Jesus?" The crowd that has gathered follows Jesus as he takes his disciples, he takes Mary and Martha to the tomb that holds Lazarus. And Jesus orders the tomb opened. And as he stands before the opened tomb, Jesus wept for his friend. Jesus knows exactly what he's going to do, and yet he grieves. He lets the tears fall down his cheeks. He knows the pains of this world. With the tears still on his cheeks, he looks up at heaven, thanks the Father for hearing him, and then cries out to the tomb, "Lazarus, come out." He cries out to a dead man in a tomb, "Come out." And the dead man stumbles out of the tomb, still with the burial clothes wrapped around him, clinging to his body, still reeking of the stench of 4 days of death. The once dead man comes out of the tomb. And this ends the trip to Bethany. But it doesn't end the pondering. When we hear this story, we focus on a dead man, rightfully so. Jesus wept at the death and the illness of this world, grieved with his friends, even though he would raise Lazarus from the dead. Even though he knew exactly what he was going to do, Jesus still grieved because even though Lazarus was raised from the dead, Lazarus' ultimate disposition is still once again death. But if Mary and Martha had not sent that note to Jesus, "Your friend is sick, come quick," what then? Mary and Martha's unspoken words, and then do something about it. Do something about it, Jesus. And he did. They too tug on Jesus' sleeve, prodding him, and then they trust. They echo the words of Jesus' mother, "They have no wine. Do something about it," and he does. Take another trip with me in the Gospel of John. At the wedding in Cana, Jesus told his mother that his hour had not come, and now his hour has come. He gathers his disciples for his final meal, the last one. And Jesus knew that the world would place him on a cross and execute him in just mere hours. And the world was crying out to God, "Do something." That night in the upper room, Jesus taught one final lesson to his disciples. He wrapped a towel around his waist. Then he knelt down and washed the battered, bruised, and beaten feet of his disciples. He washed the feet of James and John, the ones that were mostly concerned with glory, the ones who wanted to sit at his left and his right. He washed the feet of Peter, who would deny knowing him 3 times before the sun would rise, knowing exactly what was going to happen. Jesus knelt down and washed the feet of Judas, who would slip into the night and betray him to the authorities, those same authorities who would execute him on a rough-hewn cross on a hill outside the city for all to see. The world was crying out to God, "Do something." And given the opportunity to do something, given the opportunity to do one more thing in this world, Jesus knelt down and washed feet. There will be times in my life, there will continue to be times in my life where I ponder what in the world is happening, what in the world is going on here. Why is the world on fire? Why the violence? Why the illness? Why, and even more, why? And when those times of pondering come, and they will, I have a choice. I can turn the channel. I can distance myself. I can just turn away from the suffering of the world. Or I can tug on the sleeve of Jesus and point out they have no wine. And while I expectantly wait for God to do something about it, I have another choice as well. And my choice is to kneel down and wash feet. Amen.